DeLorean! It's a DeLorean! Look, it's a DeLorean! Look, a DeLorean! It's a DeLorean! Almost 40 years after its debut, this stainless steel machine drips more nostalgia than just about any other car on the planet. This is the DeLorean DMC-12. Immortalized by a Hollywood blockbuster, the spirit of this car is etched into our collective consciousness. It's nearly impossible to look at this car without recounting the iconic scenes of the Back to the Future films. While it's fun to reminisce about these classic movies, the nostalgia clouds our memory of the DMC-12 and draws a veil over the scandals and fiascos surrounding the car's history. The real story of DeLorean's rise to prominence and its quick, spectacular collapse is truly stranger than fiction. But first, you might be wondering, Ethan, how did you get a DeLorean? I rented this car on Turo. There are a ton of super unique cars to rent from regular people. It's sort of like Airbnb for cars. You can really help me out by clicking the referral link in the description below. It'll help me continue to make movies, and you can get $25 off your first Turo rental. Pretty cool, right? I remember capturing my first glimpse of a DeLorean out the side window of my parents' van during a summer vacation when I was about 9 years old. I remember yelling, "DeLorean! DeLorean!" as it passed by. Maybe you have a similar story? I'm incredibly excited to be driving around in a car that sparked my automotive imagination as a kid. The DeLorean was created by a handful of the greatest minds in the auto industry. The car's namesake, John Z. DeLorean, was a General Motors executive responsible for some of their most iconic cars. He famously left GM at the top of his game in 1973 to start the DeLorean Motor Company, with a goal of building the ultimate two-seater sports car. DeLorean had made great progress by the time the car was launched in 1981. A beautiful Giugiaro design, a brand new $140 million factory subsidized by the British government, and years of anticipation and pent-up demand for the futuristic stainless steel sports car with Gullwing Doors. Immediately, your eyes are drawn to the characteristic brushed stainless steel body, which is actually made out of the same material that restaurant kitchen counters are made out of. Now onto this car's most distinguishing feature, the Gullwing Doors. John DeLorean once owned a Mercedes-Benz 300 SL, which is said to have been the inspiration to implement gull wings on the DMC. These heavy doors lift up and down with ease because of this torsion bar, designed by Grumman Aerospace, the company responsible for the F-14 and the Lunar Space Module. The engine sits way out here in the back, under the long hatch. We'll talk more about the motor in a bit, but first, let's sit inside this wedge-shaped wonder. Man, there's nothing like sitting in a DeLorean and shutting those Gullwing doors. It's pretty cool. The dash drips with an angular 80s aesthetic. It's not the prettiest place to be, with a mishmash of interior bits borrowed from many other cars of the era, but it's very functional and actually quite comfortable. It's got huge chunky buttons for the tiny toll booth electric windows. And no, the speedometer in this particular DeLorean does not go to 88 miles per hour. Now, John DeLorean was a tall man, and he required that the interior of this car be suitable for people of a larger stature. I'm about as tall as John was, and I fit pretty comfortably in here, but it is pretty tight. Luckily, the Gullwing doors have a little cutout here to fit my head, but turning around to back this thing up, even without a hat on, I just hit my head on the ceiling. It's a little tight. But dude, I'm sitting in a DeLorean! If you can't tell, I'm pretty excited. Today, let's drive this wedge-shaped wonder on some back roads and then visit some Back to the Future filming locations. Where we're going, we don't need roads. Actually, yeah, we do. We do need roads. We really need the roads. All right, let's go. one thing out of the way first. Even casual car enthusiasts know the sorry truth about the DeLorean. It's slow, like really slow. But it wasn't supposed to be this way. Early prototypes were mid-engined and touted a space-age, lightweight composite frame. Pre-production talking points touted 200 horsepower and a 7-second 0 to 60 time. They touted it as a Corvette beater. But development dragged on for years, and it slowly diverted from the original mission. The motor never really wakes up from its slumber. It just kind of sleepily pushes the car forward. 0 to 60 time is around 10.5 seconds, which wasn't terrible for the era, but I think maybe people were just a little bit disappointed because of the really high expectations they set for this car. This motor, known as the PRV, made only 130 horsepower after being saddled with US emissions equipment. This was just one in a series of compromises that John DeLorean made in order to push this car to market. And the PRV motor wasn't the only compromise they made in the design process. The lightweight composite frame proved to be too costly to produce, and with time ticking, John DeLorean decided to turn to Lotus to help him re-engineer the chassis. Lotus adapted the chassis from their own Esprit sports car, and that made the DeLorean quite a bit heavier than they had originally intended. But what's not always mentioned, that even with those compromises, this car is actually a lot of fun to drive. Initial reviews of the driving experience of this car were mostly positive. Both Car and Driver and Road and Track mentioned, quote, fun to drive in their 1981 reviews of this car. Because of its one-of-a-kind design and incredible history, you can't help but smile and laugh the entire time you're driving this thing. It's awesome. It's hard to not be just giddy with excitement every time you step into this thing and close those gullwing doors. I'm driving a DeLorean! Driving a DeLorean, driving a DeLorean. I think we need to make a quick stop at the Twin Pines Mall. Let's go. So here we are at the Twin Pines Mall. Actually, it's the Puente Hills Mall. This is a mall where several pivotal scenes from Back to the Future were filmed. This is the place where Doc Brown unloaded the DeLorean time machine for the first time. This is the place where Marty McFly was chased by the Libyans and went back in time on that fateful day, October 26, 1985. Right through here is where the DeLorean reached 88 miles an hour. Now, apparently in this mall, they have a replica of the Twin Pines Mall sign that they use in the movie. Let's go see if we can find it. So, what happened to the DeLorean Motor Company? Production lasted just 2 years before the company went belly up. The company was set up to produce 20,000 cars a year, but just barely cracked 9,000 total. With all of the years of anticipation, how did it go so wrong so quickly? It took years to get the car to the market, and there were pretty big delays in production. As time dragged on, money and resources became more scarce, and DeLorean opted for those design changes that compromised performance. And then there was the price. The original price was supposed to be $12,000, but the price more than doubled to $25,000 by the time they got this thing introduced. And it didn't help that a recession hit the US economy right when this car was introduced. Demand was initially really high, but then word spread that the car was underpowered, enthusiasm waned, and sales quickly tanked. Let's be clear though, the DeLorean is a good car. It's unique and decently fun to drive. I think this is a classic case of over-promising and under-delivering. Had they been able to live up to the hype of an ultra-light, ultra-safe 200 horsepower sports car, maybe DeLorean would still be around today. The DeLorean failed in the marketplace because John DeLorean became the person he despised most at General Motors, a bean counter. All of the compromises and cost-cutting measures he used to bring the DeLorean to market eroded the original mission of the car. As the DeLorean Motor Company was crumbling around him, John DeLorean made some last-ditch efforts in order to infuse more cash into the company. The FBI set up a sting operation, and DeLorean allegedly agreed to a $25 million cocaine deal. Details are fuzzy as to why he was targeted, but his lawyers eventually proved entrapment. He was acquitted, but by that time, it was already too late. The company had already folded. 3 years after the company went out of business, the DMC-12 stole the show in the blockbuster movie Back to the Future. If it hadn't been for that role in that classic movie, the DeLorean might have ended up a mere footnote in automotive history. The power of a great story and iconic filmmaking helped transform one of the world's most notable automotive failures into one of the most well-known, appreciated cars in the world. Even though John DeLorean's business collapsed in a spectacular fashion, we're left with a timeless icon that causes grown adults to scream, "DeLorean! DeLorean! Look, it's a DeLorean!" Yes, it is a DeLorean. You can't drive this car without people smiling at you. It's like nonstop.
I've done it again. I've dropped another GoPro.